Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Think Suburbia, the podcast of the Suburban Virginia Republican Coalition. I'm Mike Ginsberg. I'm one of the hosts of the podcast.
Hey, I'm Jill Cook. I'm another founder of SUVGOP and the co-host of the podcast, and I want to welcome today's guests. We have with us Delegate Jason Miyares, who's represented Virginia's 82nd District down in Virginia Beach since, I think, 2015, correct?
That's correct.
And we have Lance Allen, one of the GOP candidates for Lieutenant Governor in 2021. We want to talk about the redistricting amendment that's on the ballot in November. Delegate Miyares has been very involved in this. Basically, we create a commission for redistricting to draw the lines, composed of 8 Republicans, 8 Democrats, split evenly between the parties and between legislators and citizens. So, first of all, what is redistricting? Either one of you can take that, because
it's one of those things that only comes up every decade. Literally, it's part of our Constitution, the U.S. Constitution. Every 10 years, we have a census, and that in turn determines how many people are represented. We're a big believer in one person, one vote. So we have equal districts, both in the House of Representatives in D.C., and then at the state level in the state Senate and the House of Delegates. And so it happens once every 10 years, and it's critically important, I think, coming up this year. A lot of us have probably heard the term gerrymandering. Well, that was actually a case of in Massachusetts many years ago of a district that looked like a large snake. And they named it after the congressman who had the district arranged that way. And so I guess it really comes down to, and we'll talk at length at the nuts and bolts of this, but at the end of the day, for too long, politicians have used redistricting in a way that's been completely self-serving, and it's created, I think, I think we all can agree, a pretty darn broken system. And we have a redistricting amendment in Virginia to basically, I think, take a really big step in fixing what's a pretty bad problem.
What would you say, I guess, like you say, you mentioned gerrymandering. What do you think some of the negative consequences of the current system are? What is broken about it? You mentioned it's broken. What would you say is broken about it that's in need of repair?
Well, I think what it is politicians are picking their voters and not the other way around. I think if you think of these, we call it the Fairfax onion and the Enrico U-step. I'd like to say those are jokes, but you can look them up online. These are delegate districts.
We
right,
live there.
Right, you live there, right? So, think about when you take if your child takes a plate of spaghetti and throws it against the wall, and that's suddenly a district. It has no regard for compactness, no regard for continuity. You can have a town that is split with 4 or 5 different delegates that maybe you have a couple hundred different constituents. You have no reason to ever go visit that town because, quite frankly, at the end of the day, you don't really matter. You're just a number on a map. So it has been used. Both parties have used it. But I think, we have for years been hearing that this was something that needed to be done. And I want to be clear for all your listeners, I'm not a Johnny come lately. When my party had a 30-seat majority in the General Assembly, I thought we needed redistricting reform. And now we have a situation where, as we see, Richmond is a mess. It's completely dysfunctional. We see on a host of issues from, taxes and spending, and now, from trying to defund the police to making our cops and the people that wear the badges job that much harder. Pretty much in every single conceivable issue, they have shifted way far to the left. And so my question then would be, do you really trust these politicians that are making such a mess in Richmond right now? Do you really trust them to redraw these lines? Or are you going to trust, an evenly split, 8 Republicans, 8 Democrats, bipartisan effort to get this thing done and done right? And so I think that's the big difference.
Okay, so how specifically would this process, how would the amendment change this process specifically?
Yeah, so let me give you a little bit of background for the way we amend the Constitution in Virginia. We're not a we're not a ballot initiative state in the sense that, variety of ballots can just hit. The only thing that can be voted on by the voters would be constitutional amendments. And the way it works is you have to have a piece of legislation. It's an amendment. It has to pass both House and Senate of the General Assembly. The governor's not involved. Believe it or not, to amend the Constitution, the governor is not involved. So it has to pass the House and the Senate. There has to be another election for the House and the Senate. And then with the newly constituted assembly, it has to pass again. If it passes those 2 consecutive years with an election in between, then it finally goes to the voters as a ballot initiative to amend the Constitution. And so the mechanics are, this is our one shot. If we don't get this done this year, because of the way that the Constitution requires us to redraw the lines in 2021, there won't be another chance for this until 2031. This is literally a once in a decade type of opportunity. So that is the 80,000 feet view. How are we going to amend the Constitution? This is on the ballot. It'll be likely the last issue on your ballot. After you vote for all the candidates, you go in, you vote for president, U.S. Senate, Congress. You may have some local elections, but the referendum, the constitutional amendments are always the last part of the ballot. Now, the nuts and bolts. So let me tell you what it would be if this fails. If this fails, you're going to have 55 of the most liberal, partisan, left-wing Democrats drawing the line to try to purely and solely maximize far left-wing candidates and policies and Republicans will have zero input. It would be 55 Democrats and 0 Democrats. Versus if this is passed, yeah. Hey, Lance.
I want to jump in just because I think one of the things that I want to make sure that those watching understand is when we talk about drawing those lines, that's key here. And so, Mike, you asked the question earlier, kind of what is gerrymandering? Gerrymandering is basically where one party decides, I'm going to exclude or include a certain set of voters that will give me more power. And so right now, the way the system works, as you mentioned, Jill, earlier, the way the system works in Virginia is that the political parties in power get to draw those lines, which is like this obvious conflict of interest. It seems so obvious, but it's been happening for so long. And so what they do is there's this packing process. They either pack people in or they exclude people. And so what they do is they look at a district and they decide, well, if I'm a Democrat and there are a bunch of Republicans in my district, what I want to do is I want to draw a line straight through where those Republican voters are so I can exclude them. At the same time, I want to pack as many Democratic people in to my district as possible so that I know that I win that time after time. And that's where you get what Jason referred to earlier as these kind of snake districts where you've got lines that run almost all the way across the state in no form or fashion other than the fact that those are where those voters are. Now,
in the 11th district. Yes.
So, and one other point I just want to make there before, I turn it back over, which is simply put that Democrats and Republicans have both done this. Both parties have done this time and time again. We can point to obvious snake-like districts all across Virginia in our previous history. But for the first time, Virginians have an opportunity not only to stop gerrymandering, but also to be a part of the process. 8 Republicans, 8 Democrats, and citizens that sit on this committee that will then decide, hey, we're not going to do that snake thing and we're not going to let you guys take over. We actually have a voice. And so this is the one time where we actually get to put, pedal to the metal here. Every vote, every voice in Virginia counts. Sorry, Jason, I just wanted to harp on that.
No, I think you're on point, Lance. I mean, I think both, they pack people in the districts. They have no regard to communities. They have no regards of how the districts look. But, to Lance's point, if this doesn't pass, you're going to have 55 Democrats and 0 Republicans drawing a map to maximize themselves versus if this passes, you're going to have, 8 Democrats and 8 Republicans. So we go from 55 to 0 to 8 and 8. And they got to draw a map that everybody can live with, and they have some guidelines like compactness and basically maps that make geographic sense.
Geographic sense, right, and community sense. We did a podcast with David Norcross, who was talking about the community, the small community, splitting the communities within a district, which is not really correct. I had a question going back to your involvement from the beginning, when the Republicans were in power and when the Democrats were in power. You remained consistent. What about the flip-flop of the Democrats? They were all for it. I mean, you said it had to pass both. Twice it passed. And that's right.
Yeah, I hate to say nothing makes me cynical anymore, but it was pretty unbelievable to see after many, many years of people that I thought were natural allies, that as soon as they got power. So when we passed it in January, February 2019, if you remember, Republicans had a 51-49 bare majority. Nobody knew who was going to be in control. So it passed with wide bipartisan support. 80 plus members out of 100 voted yes.
Wow.
And then and then we came back, and everybody that voted for it in 2019, they come back in January 2020, not even 12 months later, and suddenly they all opposed it. And it barely passed, and it only passed because you had a few freshman Democrats that got elected who had made it a campaign pledge. You felt like they couldn't break a campaign pledge. But it was a raw, naked exercise of power of people that just 12 months before were doing impassioned floor speeches about why we need, bipartisan redistricting. And 12 months later, because they were in power, they knew they could maximize, and they knew, hey, we could have zero Republican input. They were giving the opposite speeches. It was pretty frustrating. I'm sure, Lance, you weren't surprised by seeing that either.
So there's actually, I don't quote Democrats very often, but there's actually a quote here that I keep around just for this specific conversation from Dick Saslaw, who is a Democrat who heard the arguments on the floor of those Democrats who were opposed to redistricting. And he said, and I quote, and I'll kind of censor it here just a little bit. He said, the arguments against this amendment are pure bullcrap. I've been around here long enough to know that Virginia needs redistricting reform. That's what he said. And so, I mean, look, I don't think you can argue for it any better than that. So I'll hand it over to him.
Do we have that somewhere in writing or video or audio?
Yeah, I think might have been in the Washington Post, but
good.
You had a huge split. Even Senate Democrats were for this. It was really the most progressive wing of the Democratic far left that really did everything in their power to try to do this. And as one Democratic legislator told me, yeah, if we have control over drawing the maps, we're going to redistrict Republicans into oblivion. So that's kind of what their goal is. It's not an interest in any type of good government. And so the stakes are absolutely seismic, because I think it's going to affect what kind of Virginia we're going to have for the next decade, or what kind of General Assembly we're going to have for the next decade.
That's a good point. The word I use is hypocrisy. It's staggering to me how they can, with a straight face, come back and argue against it when they, as you pointed out, so impassionedly argued for it. So yeah, very, very important issue. That's why we want to educate our audience and our voters on that. Mike, did you have another question?
Sure. I mean, one of the things, and maybe this goes to sort of this hypocrisy issue, the Democrats have spent a lot of time, particularly over the last 4 years, talking about norms and good government and bipartisanship and all these sort of wonderful things. But in fact, a lot of that actually, this amendment is itself bipartisan, but it probably, I mean, from where I sit, it seems like it's the sort of thing that would lower the temperature on a lot of the partisan food fights that we have, because you couldn't draw a district that was safe, essentially. It seems to me a lot of congressmen, a lot of politicians are able to draw these safe districts and then become quite highly partisan because they're safe. They can move to the furthest extreme and be safe about it instead of having to deal with a larger group of voters. Do you all think that this is the sort of thing that really would improve, I guess, the quality of discourse, in this country, and maybe lower the partisanship and the sort of divides, I guess, that seem to be just getting worse and worse in the country?
I mean, this is what I think. I think you do have an increasing phenomenon of people living in communities of interest that are very similar to their own, and so you're not gonna, particularly in, like, say, in the Valley and Southwest Virginia, I mean, that is overwhelmingly a, conservative area of the state. If you go into Alexandria or Arlington, that is a very liberal area of the state. You could draw very compact districts. I think in that regard, that's not going to change. But I do think what you're going to see is you're going to take it out of the hands of politicians that are going to try to maximize the most of their ability, these districts. And in this case, it would be maximize the best of their ability, kind of a far left agenda, to something much more even-handed. And Virginians don't want what they've seen in Richmond. They are seeing the point I like to make to people is the last time the Democratic Party controlled all three branches of government, House, Senate, and the governor's mansion in Richmond, the House Majority Leader was a proud member of the NRA, Dickie Cranwell. If that doesn't tell you, today's Democratic Party is so fundamentally different than the one that I think a lot of us grew up in Virginia, which generally was they're Democrats but tried to portray themselves as generally pro-business and even moderate or conservative on certain social issues and cultural issues. That has completely changed. This is a very woke crowd, and my joke is once you go woke, you go broke. And in this case, it's going to be the taxpayers. So, I hope this will generally improve good government in Richmond, would be what I'd say.
You know what? I want to let Lance answer that, but I'm just reminded of something when Ed Gillespie was running against Mark Warner, and he said something that what you just said, Jason, so telling. One of his phrases was, Governor Warner wouldn't recognize Senator Warner right now because he was pushed so far left when he was running for his other office. And I thought that was brilliant of Ed. It was so true too. And you're saying the same thing here.
Yeah.
The party as a whole. I'm sorry, Lance, did you want to answer that?
Well, no, you're fine, Jill. Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right, Mike. And to hit on both of the points that you just made, which is this idea that we kind of start in the middle and then we gravitate more to the right or to the left. That's exactly what gerrymandering does, Mike. It polarizes people. And so when you're starting to run in these districts, you can't run on principle anymore. If that guy's left, you got to be more left. And if you're super left, the next guy's got to be really, really, really left. And the same works on the right. Until you've gone so far right, you've almost come around left. And so what we want to do is kind of change that discourse to allow people to come out and vote on principles and things that matter to them in their districts. And so when you draw these snake line, districts all the way across the state, the people on one end of the state are completely different than those on the other end of the state. And the things that matter to them and the things that are affecting their everyday lives are completely different. And we can all say this, Southwest Virginia is a lot different than Richmond. So when you have districts that kind of snake all the way around the state, what you're doing is you're polarizing people based on a political discussion versus on a what matters to me and my family discussion. And I think that this redistricting amendment allows us to take some of that control back and say, hey, look, let's put districts in a way that is common sense, a way that's logical, and a way that every district reflects the people, the businesses, and the landscape inside of it.
Right. But certainly, I mean, it certainly has the feel, particularly if it's like you say, I mean, just 55 people of one particular party are going to essentially assert their will over the entire population. That seems like a prescription for heightened animosity rather than maybe encouragement to compromise and to meet in the middle on things. Yeah, I mean, I guess, we're the Suburban Virginia Republican Coalition. We are interested particularly in suburban voters. How do you think this amendment will benefit suburban voters? Why should a suburban voter support this amendment?
I'll let Lance follow up after me, but my first initial reaction is, one, do you believe in good government? Think it's good government? Two, do you actually trust politicians in Richmond to do the right thing? When we're seeing every day, there's too many of those in Richmond that aren't doing the right thing. And I think if they don't want Chesapeake or Chesterfield or Enrico to be divided up like a cutting a piece of pizza into 50 different squares, where you have some type of compactness and you actually know who your delegate is. I mean, you have some precincts that are split up where you walk in and you literally have to try to figure out which is your delegate because you have one voting place and you have multiple ballots being issued because you have it split up either represented by 1 or 2 congressional members or 2 or 3 delegate members. And so I think it's a good government. And, you know, if you're looking at what's going on in Richmond and you want to trust politicians with this power, God bless you. But that's not something that I think anybody who's rationally looking at what's going on could do.
So, you know, I'll just tack on to that I think this is one of those common sense things where as long as I can remember, and I've only been around on this earth for 32, years, but what I'll say is, as long as I can remember, every conversation about politics has always been gerrymandering is wrong and redistricting needs to be reformed. Now Virginians have a shot at doing that no matter where you're at. And all I would say is it's time to kind of put the past behind us. This idea that if you're inside of one of those snake-like districts or you're in one of the districts that exist now, normally what you get from a politician is, well, I'm sorry, but the people on the other end of the district, they're a little bit more powerful and they come out to vote more than you guys do. So I'm sorry, I'm going to vote whatever way they want me to. And so if you're tired of those apologies, now's the time to step up on the ballot in November, make your voice be heard, because this isn't something the legislators control. This isn't something the governor controls, as Jason pointed out. This is something that only Virginians get to go to that ballot, mark yes, and make it happen. So if you want your chance to change Virginia politics, now's the time.
So here's following up with that. So the next legislature that gets elected this November, they will be implementing this in 2021.
Right.
Correct?
So
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Say both of you you're running for office in 2021, Lance, and Jason for re-election to the House of Delegates. So this will affect your races in a way, correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to affect the entire state. And it's going to affect what kind of government we're going to have that gets instituted. But I want everybody to be clear. This polls extremely well when you poll Virginians, but there are far left progressive groups that have already announced they're going to spend money in what I think is going to be a blatant disinformation campaign to defeat this, because they want the power. They don't want to give even, they don't want 8 Republicans and 8 Democrats coming up with this new map. They want 55 Democrats and 0 Republicans. So you're going to hear some serious disinformation campaign about this saying vote no. And people need to be ready. People need to talk to their friends. Hey, if you want to end gerrymandering, you want better, saner government in Richmond, vote yes on Amendment 1, because I can assure you the other side is going to spend money trying to defeat it.
You know what, Jason? I just thought of something when you were saying that. I can see a great graphic, a great visual ad, 55-0 or 8+8, which is more fair.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
Not to mention, I mean, again, 8+8, I love it. But I also like to remind people, don't forget about the citizen part of this committee. This is the time where you actually get to have a look over the politician's shoulder and say, hey, what's going on here? You guys can't do this. Put 16 politicians in a room, and I don't care what party they're from. At some point, they're going to start to skew the boundaries a little bit. And so, I think this probably affects the delegates and the state senators more so than someone like me who's running for a statewide office. And so this is the only soundbite I'll give. Redistricting is the foundational blocks of representative government in America. It's how we decide who represents us in our state legislatures and in our United States Congress. That's it. And so, there's your soundbite right there, 55-0, or equal parts Republicans and Democrats, equal parts citizens. What sounds more logical to you? And so I just want to make sure that everyone knows, and I talked with the Loudon Conservative Women's Group just the other night. I want to make sure that everyone feels like in 2021, every voice counts, because it does. And you're being told that it doesn't. And that's the disinformation campaign. They're going to pump a lot of money into telling you that things like the redistricting reform are racist, it's full of bigotry, that it doesn't matter, that it doesn't include people of color. I don't know how it can't. It includes citizens, and it includes equal parts Republicans and Democrats. So don't be fooled by it. This is your one shot, Virginia, to have a chance in what you want to happen in your state. The only person that can make this happen is every one of you that get out and go vote. And that's the only soundbite I'll make is you have a chance to make a difference. So let's see what happens.
Excellent.
No, that's great. That's
Excellent
great.
point. Yeah, Jason, we know you have to jump off. You have a call or something to jump off.
I do. I have to get on a call, but I think Lance put it well. This is about people empowerment, not politician empowerment. So let's empower people and vote yes on November 3rd on Amendment 1.
Excellent way to put it. Excellent. And we want to thank you both. You need to jump off. We're going to let Lance do give some information. But thank you for being with us. Honestly, we just really appreciate this information.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
So,
And Lance, yeah, go ahead. I was just gonna say, Lance, before we go, is there any other additional information? I know you probably have a website and, places where people can go to get a little more information about you and things you're working on.
Yep. So, selfish political pitch here. My website is lanceforva.com. My team is working on putting a redistricting reform page up right now because, look, the fight is right now. We're in 2020, and so it doesn't matter what happens to me in 2021. Let's talk about that then. But let's have a discussion on the shape of Virginia politics right now. And so there'll be a page up on my site for the redistricting thing, so you can go and find out more about it. And so the two things that I want to remind voters are, number one, because of COVID-19, the census dates, the deadlines have been pushed back. So if you have not completed your census, please make sure that you do that. All of the data that's used in redistricting is actually gathered from the census, and they do it every 10 years. So make sure that you're counted. You really want to be represented in this. Number two is vote. A lot of people are scared right now because of the pandemic about what their options are. And let me be very, very clear. If you choose mail-in voting or absentee voting, that is absolutely 100% okay, and you're free to do that. But these polls will be staffed, they will be manned, and you have the option to safely go and vote in person if that's what you choose to do. But make no mistake about it, November 2020 is your chance to change the shape of Virginia politics for the next decade, and you have to vote. There are no excuses this year, absolutely none.
Wow, excellent. Right. I'm going to fill out my census. I'm one of those ones that kind of put it off, but I'm going to do it today.
I've done it. I've done it. I have filled out the census. So yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's very important from a whole bunch of levels. And you're also right about the voting. I can tell you, I voted in the primary back in June. And I can tell you that they were very thorough in their disinfecting pens, and I mean, they just let me keep my pen. I mean, they just had pens galore, and they had masks, and it was a very, very, very carefully run voting operation. So, but of course, in-person absentee, if you do in-person absentee, you can vote early, and I can tell you, if you do that, often it's not that crowded. So not only are you getting the benefits of a very well-run precinct operation or a in-person absentee operation, you also probably aren't going to see much of a crowd. So you can do that as an option. Anybody can do that, I believe. Anybody can vote absentee this year. So they can vote. They can just say COVID, and that's enough.
Well, I'll tack on to that. September 19th is a key date for you to remember.
Yep.
If you do not want to go to the crowded polls on November the 3rd, September 19th, the electoral offices across the state of Virginia will open up to allow you to come in. You can vote in person, but you don't have to vote with everyone else. So you don't have to worry about a crowd. But as Mike said, it's very important to remember that we are doing things safely. Social distancing, face coverings are recommended. They're going to have a minimum number of folks that are allowed inside of these different sites that they're putting up. And so I don't want anyone to be scared about coming out to vote. There are lots of different options. I'm sure the SUVGOP will have plenty of information up about how you can go and vote. And then also, I implore you actually, to go and visit your county's website electoral office page. They will have the most up-to-date information on what's going to happen September 19th up until the day of voting at the polls.
Thank you. Great way to end that out. That's a great answer. So thank you, Lance, for being here with us. I think this is another very informative event. And Mike?
Yeah. Thank you again, both Jason and to Lance, for joining us and for that really helpful information and background and spirited understanding of why this really is so important. It's probably the most important issue no one's talking about, and that's why we are getting out there and talking about
I'm
it,
out
because it really is
campaigning
that.
right now, and I'm telling you, I'm not campaigning for myself. I'm campaigning for this amendment. And every time I go and I talk to a group and I ask, who's heard of the redistricting amendment, I get crickets. And so what we want to do with this podcast and with everything that we're doing across the state is have all those hands go up and say, I know about it and I'm voting yes.
That's
Perfect.
great. That's great. Now we hope to be one more a block in the foundation of that effort, and you guys have been really helpful. So thanks to both of you. We hope that you enjoyed this video podcast, and if you did, you can go to our website SUVGOP.com and find all of our podcasts from this year and from years past. Just go to SUVGOP.com, go to the drop-down menu, find SUVGOP's podcasts, and they're all there. And all our video podcasts from this year are available at the SUVGOP YouTube page, and there are links to that as well at the SUVGOP homepage. So with that, thank you for joining us on this edition of Think Suburbia, and we look forward to seeing you on the next version of Think Suburbia. Thanks again for joining us.